Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. So what it is, and so I have to describe it for the listener. So it's a podcast about photography, but it seems to work. So it's a book cover, and it says "The Other Madisons: The Lost History of a President's Black Family" by Bettye Kearse. Right. So it's a basically the main color of the background is black, and then you can just sort of tell the figure, like a head, like the sort of the chest and the top profile of it looks like a woman, and it's an image made of other portraits, and the lettering is in this nice off-white over it. I mean, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful book cover. How old is this book?
It is 3 years and 3 months old.
Oh, wow. And have you written many other books?
No, just this book. I've done a lot of writing.
Okay.
A lot of publications in magazines, but this is my first and only book.
Okay. So do tell. Obviously, it's a very important book.
So this, let me just give just a little bit of background about myself. I was a pediatrician for more than 31 years in Boston. And
Oh, wow.
I really loved it, but I always sort of had a nudging kind of ache that there was something else I was supposed to be doing with my life. And it turns out that it had to do with my family history. What I was supposed to be doing had something to do with my family. And according to my family's oral history, I descend from an enslaved cook and her enslaver and half-brother, President James Madison.
Mm.
So I grew up, with this knowledge. And in 1990, my mother came to me and gave me a box of family memorabilia, which meant that now I am the family griot, the oral historian, the keeper of the stories and the artifacts. And when I asked my mother why now, she said, I want to give you plenty of time to write the book. I didn't know I was going to be writing a book. But what she meant was that she wanted me to record the stories so that they wouldn't be lost. And so that our family would remember where we came from, beginning to get a little bit comfortable with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But it was important to my mom and became important to me that we knew about our ancestors and all that they had gone through and what gifts we had inherited from them. And then she also felt that our family story should become part of America's story.
Yeah.
So I wrote a book. I wrote down these the stories, the history. And I had a mentor who said, your story is much more important than just your family. More people should hear this. So he suggested I write it as a novel. So I did that, but it was not very good.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in a very rigorous writing group, and I had written, this novel. They said, oh, the characters stay on the page. It doesn't evoke any emotion. So clearly I had failed as a novelist. But I had written a prologue that described how my mother heard the stories and how I heard the stories. They said, well, why don't you write it like that? So it was basically a memoir. So it became a memoir. My first effort at writing a memoir wasn't that it was good, but it wasn't kind of singing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because what was missing from this memoir was me. I was
Okay.
talking about everything that what meant to me, but I wasn't really grabbing on to what it was creating inside of me,
Hmm.
and that required growth. I grew up kind of spoiled, pampered, and I had to get out. I had to get outside of that. So
Mm.
is this kind of a long answer?
There are no answers. It's just we're just talking.
Oh, that's not okay. We're just talking.
We're just
So
talking.
that means I get to tell you a little bit about my research because my research was really phenomenal. I decided that I really wanted to kind of understand what the slavery thing was that my ancestors had experienced.
Hmm.
So I thought I would do my best to try to experience what they experienced so I could
Oh wow,
understand more about myself.
wow.
So I went to Ghana, West Africa, where my first stolen ancestor, lived and was stolen
Hmm.
from there. And I visited the slave castle, which is not a
Oh wow.
castle. I don't know how many people know that it is not a castle. It was built as a fort, but it's really a place where enslaved people were held
It's a
before
prison.
being shipped across the Atlantic.
Yeah.
So I went there and it was there where my ancestor was. It's a woman named Mandy.
Wow.
And I went to Lagos, Portugal, where the transatlantic slave trade began,
Hmm.
to try to learn, well, who were these people? Henry the Navigator and, his cohorts who would steal massive numbers of people, who would destroy massive, unfathomable numbers of lives, who destroyed the freedom of these people.
Hmm.
So I went to Lagos, Portugal, and I got angry with these people. It was
Hmm.
there's these phenomenal statues of these enslavers, these abductors, and very little of the enslaved people. I went there. I
Ah.
went I went to Baltimore, Maryland, where there's a replica of a slave ship, and you can go inside this thing.
Hmm.
And no replica can ever really recreate the real experience.
Of course.
But you go into this plate, this replica, and you kind of feel encaptured.
Hmm.
And they have recorded sounds of waves splashing and bells clanging and people sobbing and chains rattling, and you do get a sense of it.
Hmm.
And I went to New York City, where there was an 18th century African burial ground had recently been discovered because I wanted to know how my ancestors had been buried, and I learned something positive. I learned that they were buried as human beings,
Mm.
with rituals and buried with objects, and so I began to get a feel for things. But I think a very important part of my travels was going to and from Montpelier,
Okay.
was James Madison's former plantation in Virginia, to see where my ancestors labored and died. So as I did this, and it happened over a number of years, I grew up. I mean, I was
Okay.
actually 47 when I started, but I didn't really grow up and until I went through this experience, which my friends said was brave, but I didn't think of it as being brave.
Hmm.
I thought of it more as kind of an internal and emotional journey.
Sure.
So anyway, it ended up with at the book. That book.
Well, because one of the things that I'm trying to do in the conversation and with you is to hopefully convey, it's one of these things where it's very subtle, right? In just the few emails and then the few seconds of actually talking here with you, or what really conveys and communicates, it's a spirit, it's a sort of an attitude, an energy that I'm very attuned to. I personally am very sensitive. I'm very sensitive to. And I want that to communicate because, so for example, in this particular case, we start the conversation with a cover of this book. And so is the rest of the conversation that you're curating sort of extending from that? Like, do you want to move on to the next image from here now, or do you want to say something else about the book in particular?
Well, quickly. That is the other Madisons, the lost history of a president's black family. Well, the title is actually all wrong. The other Madisons. My family is not really the other Madisons. We are James Madison's only known direct descendants. And the subtitle is wrong because the history is not really lost. It has lived in my family for 8 generations and will continue on for more generations.
For sure.
So now let's move on.
So is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So if you like what you've seen and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting.